There's really something about crime stories that intrigue us, right? So join me as we delve into how to research criminal ancestors and introduce you to some of the brilliant minds behind our brand new historical crime podcast. You are not going to want to miss this one.
Welcome to Fridays Live.
Hello everybody, welcome back to Fridays Live. My name is Ellie, I'm social media manager here at Findmypast. And yeah, it's time for Fridays Live. It's the time of the week where we come together and we talk about family history, we talk about history, we talk about your discoveries, we talk about our discoveries. And it's generally just a nice, relaxed way to wind into the weekend and to celebrate all things genealogy, basically. If you are new, please tell us where you are tuning in from today. We absolutely do not bite. We have a lovely, wonderful audience of people who come here every week, and we are delighted if you're here for the first time that you are a part of it as well. So please do introduce yourself and chat amongst yourselves in the comments. If you are a returning viewer, hello, welcome back. It's great to see you. We've got a really packed agenda today, actually. So I am going to delve into the new records of the week, and there's a good spread of stuff today, actually. Really enjoyed exploring these for you. Then we're going to do question of the week. I'll bring it up on screen in just a second. But then what we're going to do is we're going to pivot into crime, gritty, intriguing crime, historical crime. I'm going to look a little bit at my top 5 tips for tracing criminal ancestors, and then I'm also going to do top 5 resources for tracing criminal ancestors. So you won't want to miss those. Stick around. But the real juicy bit of this session, I will be joined by the producer and one of the co-hosts of our brand new true crime podcast. Was justice served? You decide. Is that the tagline? I can't remember what the tagline is now. But yeah, if you've not listened to it yet, this will be your perfect introduction to our new podcast. And it is just, it's fantastic. It's just so well researched. It's well produced, and we've got some great talent and some great stories, and it will really make you think. So, but that's to come. Let's welcome some of you here today. We've got lots of you here. We should also have Liam in the comments, so please say hi to Liam. I basically blackmailed him to doing comments today because he's had a very busy week, bless him. So please do say thank you to him for turning up. I'm joking, he loves it here. Okay, who have we got? We've got Gillian with us. Hello. We've got Shirley over on YouTube. Andrea, we've got Gordon, we've got Kim, we've got Daphne. Lovely. So many of you here today. This is great. As a quick question there, has anybody listened to the crime podcast yet? I'd be really interested to know how many of you are either aware of it or have, even listened to an episode. I'm really, really curious. Oh, Daphne says, great podcast. You read my mind, Daphne. Thank you very much. I'm really pleased you're enjoying it. Unfortunately, some Facebook gremlins at the moment with Matthew. The video is not launching. Well, that's one of the reasons we stream to multiple channels. So yeah, you can actually watch on YouTube, Facebook, and also on X as well, formerly known as Twitter. The frustrating thing is with that, though, you can't leave comments, which is frustrating. But hey ho. Okay, right. Shall we delve in? Before we do, let me bring up our question of the week, which is, which of your ancestors was involved in a crime as a victim, suspect, or witness? And if none of these apply to you, tell me about a historical true crime that intrigues you. We'll go with that. Lovely. Okay, so let's do some new records, shall we? And we are going to start with the Women's Land Army Service records from 1939 to 1950. Liam, if you could pop a link to the weekly blog post in the chat for me, please, so everybody can follow along. So these new Women's Land Army Service cards, there's 36,000 new records for this collection, and it takes the collection as a whole to, I think, just over 133,000. If you don't know, the Women's Land Army was first set up in 1917, but it was reformed as the Second World War loomed in the close distance, that's not a phrase, in 1939 to ensure that the country was fed. And I do want to caveat with, remember that if your ancestor or your relative who served in the Land Army would still be under 100 years old. Their record won't be live yet, but because we've released 36,000 new ones this week. It's like a rolling release style thing. So if your ancestor's not there yet, keep an eye out, because as they pass 100 years old, we will be able to release them. It's because they contain full dates of birth, similar to how the 1939 register contains full dates of birth, and we have to redact those. So with these records, you can normally find their name, their date of birth, their age, their present occupation, their land army number, their address, details of where they served, and any transfer notes. Now, last time, when we first released this collection, I decided to look up some overthrow ancestors. This time I looked up some Ayton ancestors with my married name, and I found that Miss Eva Mary Ayton, who was 20 years old, of 25 Eastbury Road in Chiswick, served from 1942 and at one point moved to Cornwall to continue her work there. And it also told me that her occupation before the war was a typist and a clerk. Also, you may also be intrigued to know the story of Amelia King. Now, she was a land girl, and she was refused entry into the Land Army initially on account of her race. And we've been telling her story and championing her story. We have a whole blog post about her as well. And Liam, if you could put a link to that in the chat as well, I would be very grateful. Thank you very much. Second new collection of this week, we've got the Huguenot Society of Pennsylvania application papers, and there's 36,000 new records for this. These are fascinating. I spent about 15-20 minutes exploring these earlier, because that's all I allowed myself, because you guys know exactly what I'm like. If we have new records that I've not looked at yet, it's a rabbit hole and that's it. Nothing else gets done for the entire day. So French Protestants from the Huguenot community, they immigrated to the colonies quite early on. And the Huguenot Society in Pennsylvania was one of the first in North America. And this collection is basically pedigree-based applications to join the society. And they were created to prove the lineage back to an original Huguenot immigrant. So these can be a really, really valuable source if you're a descendant nowadays. But just like with any historical material, particularly these sort of genealogical pedigrees, you will want to verify this information for yourself. Don't take it at face value. Just use it as a clue and then interrogate that data quite thoroughly. So you'll normally find your ancestors' name, their gender, their year of application, and then the details of any relatives. So when I went in to have a look at these, there are actually 2 Aytons in there. I couldn't believe it. I just put it in just to test. I thought it was going to be no results. I got 2. So I've got Henry Ayton, born in 1753, and then Samuel Ayton, born in 1779. So I'm thinking maybe a son and a father. So if I look at the original images, there's actually an entry for Samuel and Henry, and they appear as relatives or as ancestors for an application made in 1931 for a woman named Laura Valeria Bergman. And then it's quite impressive, actually. So it's got her details, then it's got her parents, and it's got when they married, when they were born, when they died, and then it's grandparents, and then it's trying to trace it all the way back to that original Huguenot ancestor. So it goes back all the way back to her 6 times great-grandparents, Marion Duval, born in France, and his wife, Susanna. So even if you think that, like me, you don't have any Huguenot connections, give this a go, because you might be pleasantly surprised. And then last up, we've got some new additions into our New York Roman Catholic collection. There are 170,000 new baptisms and 125,000 new marriages. And New York is the second largest Catholic diocese in the United States. And these are really fantastic records, actually. They're quite detailed, and you can often find names, birth years, baptism years even, the marriage year, obviously, and then for the baptisms, the parents' names, and maybe some godparents or sponsors. And then for the marriages, you can often find witnesses as well. A quick look at newspapers. We now have an incredible 80 million newspaper pages in our newspaper collection. 80 million. So I just want to give a huge shout out to the guys who who bring these online for you every week. You know, there's people who go out there and, you know, organize like licensing contracts with publishers. So people like Rose, for example. And then you've got people who do the scanning and from paper and from microfilm in our Boston Spa digitization studio. They're amazing. And then you've got the other guys in the data team who bring all of those online so you can search them from the comfort of your own home. And yeah, love newspapers, love the team. Fantastic. There are 2 new titles. There's the Boston Independent and Lincolnshire Advertiser, and then we've also got the Lansing Herald, and then we've also updated a further 20 titles. Lovely. I did all of that in under 10 minutes. I'm very proud of myself. This is what happens when I don't allow myself to go down the research rabbit hole, you guys. So, question of the week. We're going to have to do a pretty speedy question of the week this week because we have a lot to get through, and we do have 2 special guests waiting in the green room. I can see them right now. They're waiting very patiently for me to invite them into the stream. But we're going to do question of the week, and then we're probably going to do some really quick fire top tips, and then we're going to get into the real juicy bits of this session. Okay, so let me find my question of the week banner. Which of your ancestors was involved in a crime as a victim, suspect, or a witness? And if none of these apply to you, what is your favorite or the historical crime that most intrigues you? That's what I want to know today. And as I said, this is going to be speedy. Okay, so Sarah says, my great-great-grandfather was the victim of theft on his way home in his horse and trap late one night. Having visited a very generous relative, he fell asleep while his horse headed home, knowing the route well. That's a good horse. On arriving home, he realized his pocket watch was missing. The local constabulary were notified. The culprit was identified, a youth who was spotted committing the crime. And the pocket watch was returned. I don't know, honestly, the thing I'm taking from that is the horse who knew the way home. That's just where my brain had gone to. Matthew says, one of my early 19th century relatives, Samuel Baverstock, appeared in the prison hulk registers at the National Archives. He was tried in Reading in November 1833. Yeah, those prison hulk registers I find quite fascinating, actually. Rosie says, not my family, but the Salisbury poisoning in the Reading Mercury, 16th of December, 1865. Was he guilty? I'm going to go and have a look because I want to know too. What else have we got here? So Elaine says, I've got a criminal on both sides of my family. On one side is a young teenager who was sentenced to 1 month's hard labour for taking a package from the local train station. I'm interested in what kind of work hard labour would be involved in the end of the 1800s, beginning of the 1900s. I think he saw himself as the man of the house as his father had died. On the other side is a man who got involved in the death of a gamekeeper and was transported to Australia. Fascinating. Kim says Elizabeth Woolerton was hanged in 1815 for murder by arsenic poisoning. The trial was 20 minutes long and one-sided with 10 witnesses to her none. Goodness gracious me. I can see Maddie and David's faces in the green room looking at that with keen interest. Okay, keep those coming in, you guys, and if we can, we'll try and get to some more at the end. I'm going to do some quick fire tips now, and then you guys are all here for the guests anyway. You're not here for me, you're here for our special guests. Okay, so let's do top 5 record collections for researching criminal ancestors with one bonus that you will not want to miss. So these are top resources. So my first one is naturally the Crime, Prisons and Punishment record collection, which covers 1770 to 1935. There's over 6 million records from various sources from the National Archives, and you can discover information about the crimes, sentences, trials, petitions, correspondence, prison registers, licenses, reports, transfers, and even photographs. This is one of my favorite record collections ever. It's huge. The detail you can uncover is incredible, and it is actually the largest single collection of British crime records available online, I believe. And if you find that record collection from our All Record Sets page and you scroll down, you can see a full list of all the individual collections that's in this wider collection. Number 2, the Irish prison registers of 1790 to 1924, and you can use these to find out if your ancestor was in an Irish jail. And it covers the stories of more than 3 million people. And as a segue to that, don't miss the Petty Sessions court registers for Ireland either. just to see if you can find out any more about your ancestors' brush with the law. There are 22 million records here. That's a huge number. And it also includes details of victims, witnesses, and those accused. The petty sessions were the lowest courts in the land, and they dealt with things like money owing and domestic disputes, and also public order offences. Number 3, Manchester prison registers for 1847 to 1881. There are around 250,000 of these, and they cover admissions for certain prisons. There's some gaps in the coverage, but they are quite detailed. So you'll get things like names, sentence, summary of the conviction, date of birth, trade, occupation, education, marital status, whether they had any children, and the list goes on and on. I told you these would be quick fire. Number 4, Yorkshire, Sheffield Crime and Courts and Convict for 1737 to 1938, I think. That's quite a broad year range there. There are 208,000 records here, and it covers those who committed crimes and those who also brought them to justice. And this is another bigger collection that covers various different sources from the Sheffield archives. And again, a full list of all those collections is available on the record search page. For example, you might find somebody, I don't know, stealing a cabbage, or, swearing, or breaking into a house. It could be various different things. And then number 5, Surrey quarter sessions for 1780 to 1820. There's around 47,000, I think, records for this one. And these are really good if you have Surrey ancestors who committed non-capital offences. And then you also get the witnesses and the victims caught up in those crimes as well. And the bonus one, is that tip 6? I can't count. Yes, of course I can. Newspapers. Obviously, we have to talk about newspapers. If you find an ancestor in any of the resources I've already mentioned, check the newspapers next. You'll get even more detail. Sometimes you'll get like a full rundown of the trial, including things like witness statements, which side the newspaper took, photos, illustrations. Do not sleep on the newspapers in anything, but particularly in crime, because crime was headline news. And now we're going to do top 5 tips for researching criminal ancestors. My first one, if you want to find a photo, go to the Crime, Prisons and Punishment record set, add in MEP06, PCOM2 or PCOM4 into Crime, Prisons and Punishment. Now, my favourite ones are the licenses, but you can find them in different record sets as well. Obviously, we just talked about it, but check the newspapers. The Victorian press in particular loved crime. They often sensationalized it. You can get full commentaries on trials, on appeals, on sentencing, and you'll often get more details than you would in traditional records. Number 3, research the context around your ancestor's crime and the time period and the location, because it will help you understand it more. What laws were in place at the time? Was the sentencing, did it tend to be lenient or did it tend to be strict? What might have led your ancestor to find themselves on the wrong side of the law? Think about their own context and what their life was like. Number 4, if you find a criminal ancestor and they may have been incarcerated around the time of a census year, check the census as well, see who they were serving their time with. And then my 5th tip for this is, when you find a record for your ancestor, open the original image, if one is available, and check every single detail, every single page. Transcribe those extra details if you need to, because you never know what you're going to find. You can often find what letters were sent to and from the person in prison, for example. You can find details of petitions, of appeals, whether it got to the Home Secretary, and more. Okay, those are all my tips for you. Now, I know you guys are all joining today for my special guests, and it is almost time to bring them in. But first of all, I just want to whet your appetite a little bit with our trailer for our brand new true crime podcast.
Welcome to Was Justice Served, the podcast where we journey back in time to some of the past's most cryptic criminal cases.
This is a story that has shaped the culture within my family.
They didn't hold back.
First impressions, obviously, poisoning. There is no witness itself. There's no weapon to be uncovered. This is the classic country house mystery, isn't it?
The newspaper coverage on this case would have been national.
A jury is going to be impressed by the fact that they are dealing with an army veteran. You're building up a picture of somebody that's a bit of a grifter. When the curtains get drawn, who knows what happens behind those curtains?
Gosh, it's straight out of Hollywood, really, isn't it?
So much power in that gavel.
Was Justice Served? Available wherever you get your podcasts.
And now you're going to see me dancing to the dramatic music at the end of our trailer. Find My Past has a brand new podcast. It's called Was Justice Served? And to tell you all about it, I want to bring in two very, very special people. The podcast producer, Maddie Gilbert. Hi, Maddie.
Hello, hi.
And I also want to bring in Professor David Wilson, who is one of our co-hosts. Hiya, David.
Hi, how are you?
Good, thank you. How are you? Let me change the setup here, and then we can see each other all better. There we go.
There I am. That's better, isn't it? Yes, I'm actually a bit tired because I stayed up till 4 o'clock in the morning to watch the election results, and I wanted to stay up long enough to see Jacob Rees-Mogg lose, but in the end I fell asleep, and so I feel very tired and unsatisfied, although I do now know that Rees-Mogg lost.
You did what my husband did. He also stayed up until 4 a.m. and is now suffering for it today. Lovely to see you both here today. Before we delve in, do you mind just introducing yourselves very briefly? Maddie, you're our PR manager and our podcast producer, but tell us a bit more about yourself.
Yeah, hi everybody. I've come on Fridays Live once before when we obviously launched our first podcast, which was Step Into the Past. As Ellie says, my role is as senior PR manager at Find My Past, and as part of that is obviously producing these really fun, really exciting, really interesting podcasts. The newest of which is our true crime one, Was Justice Served? And I get to work with people like David, which is amazing. So David, over to you.
Do you know, the two of you are so professional when you speak to an audience. It never ceases to amaze me how good you are at this. So I'm David Wilson. I'm Emeritus Professor of Criminology at Birmingham City University. Prior to picking up my academic career again, I was a prison governor for 14 years, working mostly with violent men. My expertise academically and in practical terms is with people who've committed murder or serial murder. I still occasionally do live police investigations. And quite apart from presenting this podcast, I also present on television, filming at the moment, the new Channel 4 series I do with Amelia Fox called In the Footsteps of Killers, and I write books. And I've been delighted to work with Maddie and her colleagues. It's been a really wonderful experience. And Jen, who of course is the unsung hero of the podcast, rather than me, Jen always seems to do all the work. I just seem to rock up and go, well, I think this is quite an important matter here. But the thing about Jen, as you're probably picking up from the little clip you showed, is she loves that gavel. She just absolutely loves banging the gavel. And can I tell you, one of my favorite cliches is that British judges don't use gavels. So if you ever see a TV series in which the judge bangs a gavel, you will know they've not done their research. No British judge uses a gavel.
I wonder how many people will get pointing that out to us in the podcast as well.
Brilliant. We have a lot of love for Jen. She's also a host of Fridays Live. She often does, she often has the hat on that I'm wearing today, which is hosting, and our community absolutely love her. And she's off on holiday today, but we miss her. She's probably lurking in the comments somewhere. She's probably watching as we to basically say how amazing she is. But yes, for the next for 35 minutes or so. We're going to have a natter about was justice served, how it came about, and the stories behind it. But if you have any questions for either Maddie or David, please do pop them in the comments. We will try get to them before we finish up today. So David, you touched on this a little bit already. You are a criminologist by trade, as you said. You're also a historian. Can you tell us a little bit more about your particular areas of interest?
Okay, so I was actually trained as a historian. I literally finished my PhD on the Friday, and on the Monday I was the assistant governor at Wormwood Scrubs. So what really intervened to stop me taking up an academic career was I played rugby, and I got fouled very badly on the rugby field, and it was that incident that made me want to change the entire course of the work that I was doing. And my PhD was about the philosophical origins of the American Civil War, to be perfectly honest. And because of the incident on the rugby field, I got sent off because I punched my opponent and I broke his nose. We were both sent off the field, and 2 hours later we were best friends drinking in the college bar. It just so happened that that week, the Cambridge Evening News, I went to Cambridge University, the Cambridge Evening News covered the story of a young man who had used no more violence than I had used, but he didn't go to the university. He was an unemployed labourer. The violence, the context for his violence was in a pub, and he punched the bouncer and broke his nose. But he got sent to prison for 2 years. And I wanted to know, why does his violence in that context lead to prison, and my violence in my context leads to us drinking some pints and becoming friends in the college bar? And the answer is, of course, privilege. The answer is, of course, class. The answer is, of course, the ability to avoid the label being applied to you. But it was that incident that made me want to use my historian's skills to think about a broader social issue, which is who and why we punish. And most of my work has therefore always been with men. I've never worked with female offenders, men who've committed violent crime. And because I ended up in a wonderful prison called Grendon, which is the only prison in the whole of Europe that works as a psychodynamic therapeutic community, I was often in discussion with men who were in therapy about when and why and how they would use violence. And that experience made me realize that I could really understand, not just through reading books, but through talking to violent men, why they were being violent. And I harnessed those experiences to help to design and run the 2 units at Wood Hill Prison in Milton Keynes for the 12 most violent men in the country, which is really where I came into contact with a lot of the serial murderers that you would have heard of. So my experience has been very direct, but don't ignore that point about the skills and training I had as a historian, and how those skills and training as a historian have bled into bad use of language there, bled into my direct work with violent men.
Utterly fascinating. I didn't know that's how you came about to be involved, to go down the criminologist route. That one moment in your life when you're like, this is the same thing that's happened, and there are 2 very, very different outcomes here. Oh,
Can't
have I
hear
lost
anything?
Oh.
Can you hear me, Maddie?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Oh no, David can't hear us. Oh dear. We can hear you. Oh no.
Possibly if he rejoins, let's see if that will work.
Yeah. One moment, everybody, while we sort out some gremlins. Thank you for your patience.
So everybody can hear me, but I'm afraid I can't hear any questions at all. So so you can hear me have to exit and rejoin. I don't know if my skills will be up to that, but I'll do my. Why could somebody maybe put a question? Could somebody perhaps put a question in, or shall I exit and rejoin?
Yeah, try that. There we go. We'll see if that works. And Maddie and I can talk a little bit about the concept behind it. Well, hopefully David tries to rejoin as well. Thank you for your patience, everybody.
It's always the way, isn't it?
Exactly. Okay, so while we wait for David to come back, let's chat a little bit about the concept, shall we? So how did Was Justice Served come about, Maddie?
So, I mean, you know, you've talked on Fridays Live so much about newspapers. They're such an amazing resource, and I'm sure everybody here has kind of, you know, already delved into them and found some amazing things about their own families. And I think really what we wanted to do was kind of make the most of that kind of treasure trove of stories in some way. Hi, David, can you hear us now? No? No, possibly not.
No, can't hear us.
I can hear you now.
Yay! Welcome back. David, I was just giving a bit of a kind of background to kind of how we came up with the podcast concept. So I'm going to just bore everybody with that for a moment. So yeah, as I was saying, you know, newspapers being the kind of foundation of this, as that kind of unbelievable historical resource, such a great source of stories. And what we wanted to do, obviously, one of the things that is kind of offered in real time, if you like, are those kind of criminal cases, you know, as they happen, the crime scene, those descriptions of the crime scenes, the people involved, and then into the trial. And you can kind of, you can see them happening and as they go in the newspapers, whether that's, you know, the people being arrested, or whether that's kind of, you know, testimonies in court. So what we wanted to do was kind of, you know, use this in some way and offer a bit of kind of storytelling for the public, and kind of really showcase those newspapers. Obviously, true crime is such a popular genre at the moment, for anything from kind of what you might watch on TV or Netflix, and also in podcasts or radio programs or whatever it is that you might get your entertainment. It's such a much loved genre, and so we also wanted to tap into that, obviously, and so we kind of put that together with genealogy and the expertise we have with our researchers and Jen, and the whole idea is that we're re-examining those historical cases found within newspaper collections and records. We look at the scene of the crime, we look at the characters involved, we look at their backgrounds, the connections between them, we look at kind of the twists and turns of the case, like how did it play out, what was the evidence that was given, can we pick some holes in that, can we find some other maybe possible motives or causes or things that, you know, maybe they missed at the time, and then we obviously kind of try and come to a bit of a conclusion about whether was justice served. And, you know, obviously we have such two really amazing hosts for it. So we have David, who offers that kind of criminological perspective on things and that real expertise about, you know, what do we see in modern cases? What's that criminal behavior look like from a modern perspective? But also, you know, what's the legal precedent for some of these things? And then we have as well Jen, who gives us that great kind of social history, family history, genealogy, research background that plays in so fundamentally as well to the podcast.
Yeah, it's just a fantastic concept. I mean, obviously I've not worked on the podcast as you have, Maddie. Like, I've sort of like swooped in at the last minute and like made some social media content for it. But everything that I listened to for each of the episodes is just fantastic. Unfortunately, David is not going to be able to stay because he cannot hear us. But fear not, because we will have him back, and we will have him back with Jen, because we feel like they really should be doing this together anyway.
Yeah, and Jen and David can give you a kind of a taste of their dynamic, and because they're great together, and they really play off each other as well, which I think is something that was a bit of a risk in the podcast, because you kind of a lot of with podcasts, you kind of get two people together in a room and you're just hoping that the dynamic works. That's the kind of main element of risk, I suppose, in planning something. You can research all you want, you can create the storylines all you want, you can script it all you want, all of those sorts of things. And actually this was a really unscripted podcast, but actually when they came together, it was magical. It was great. They have a fantastic time.
I know what you mean. It's a risk when you do things like podcasts, is, are the co-hosts going to have that rapport that is engaging and entertaining for a listener? It's a massive risk, but they are so good together. I could listen to them both talk for hours. I just think they're brilliant. Okay, Maddie, I was wondering, actually, going back to our question of the week, do you have anybody in your family tree who was involved in a crime at all, as a suspect, a witness, or a victim? And if not,
you know what? My family are such goody two shoes. They're really desperately dull. Honestly, they are so boring. But I suppose there's one side of my family that have got a lot of lawyers and solicitors, so possibly they were kind of involved in like the legal side of things. And then the only other one that I've found is such a minor case. One side of my ancestor are from Devon, and there's a kind of classic report in the local like Examiner or whatever it is, about a dispute over a kind of, well, you're growing mustard plants here and this is my boundary, and it's kind of that classic like parochial dispute about gardening, and this is my patch of land and you're not supposed to be on it. So really, like, honestly, desperately boring. But I mean, there's I'd love it if there was kind of a massive kind of interesting case there, but sadly mine are very, very low key.
I think mine are pretty low key as well, to be fair. I think probably the most for me, my great-grandfather had a half-brother, and his mother was at one point, she'd had a baby out of wedlock, and this was just before she married like my ancestor, and the baby died, and she was basically hauled through the courts as being a terrible mother and having, it was awful that she didn't pick up that the baby was sick, and it was all her fault. And I think she was actually found guilty of manslaughter. And I read this in the newspapers, and I'm just like, she's just lost her baby. Like, she probably had no help. This was her first child as well, I think. She probably had no idea what she was doing, and she was vilified, and it's just very sad.
And you know what? That's such a fascinating kind of look, and something that we touch on quite a lot in the podcast is, there's so much of this kind of standards of the time that you have to contend with, the things that obviously, we might have absolutely decriminalized and are just a normal part of our society, like homosexuality, for example. There's so many of those cases where actually you look back and you're like, gosh, the justice system really failed these people, like your ancestor and things like that. And there are really some really heartbreaking things that we kind of look at, for example, things like domestic abuse, which was just not seen in the same way 100 years ago as it is now, and getting any sort of conviction. I know even now that's still quite hard to get a conviction for things like marital rape and things like that, but 100 years ago it was nigh on impossible. And so that is such a fascinating kind of lens, and some of those older crimes that are just we just don't see in kind of common parlance today, like concealment of birth and things like that are really, really fundamentally tied up with social kind of history moments, like the fact that, you know, it was incredibly scandalous to have a baby out of wedlock, and therefore if you were, for example, a maid in a country, in a big house or something, and you were having a baby out of wedlock and you had concealed the birth, you are then kind of liable for criminal prosecution. And so there's, you know, we often look at it like it seems like there's this incredible lack of empathy, and a bit like you know, Elaine was saying earlier, where her ancestor was kind of transported or given hard labor, and it's for things that are essentially people just trying to kind of put bread on the table or help out their family or whatever it is. So, you know, it's such rich pickings for these, you know, actually very emotional and very interesting stories.
Speaking of emotional and interesting stories, I wondered, for anybody who hasn't checked out the podcast yet, there are 3 episodes that have come out so far, and there are 2 more to come in this season. Could you give us a little bit of a teaser, so to speak, on the first 3 episodes?
Sure, yeah. So as you say, there are kind of 5 episodes in total in this season. So the first one that is our pilot episode is actually a really special one because we have a guest. So the first one features Professor David Olusoga, who is, I'm sure lots of you will know him. He's a much loved kind of British TV historian. He presents House Through Time. He does a lot of kind of writing for The Guardian, for example. He's written a book about Black Britain, Black and British. So he's a really, really interesting man. And he basically actually brought us this story, a remarkable story from his own family tree. And he'd done all the research. So big tick in my book. He'd done all the research, and he kind of brought this story for us to kind of, for Jen and David to talk about with him. And the story is of a murder that his great-great-grandfather commits in broad daylight up in Byker, which is like a suburb of Newcastle in the Victorian period. So, you know, this kind of big industrial town where people are kind of living on top of each other in these kind of tenement blocks. And it's a dispute that goes on for kind of a decade that then kind of boils over and ends in this very shocking kind of shooting in broad daylight that his great-great-grandfather commits. And, you know, it's so fascinating to hear his perspectives on having been kind of a direct descendant of somebody who committed a hugely, you know, a very traumatic event. And obviously it's something that, because it's still relatively recent, it's been passed down, that story in his family from kind of generation to generation. And you can kind of really get the sense that this is a story and this is an event that has, you know, still has consequences today. It has impacts on every member of his family, including him and where he is in his life today. And so that's a really, really fascinating one. Sorry, there's a siren. I hope you can't hear. That's too loud.
They can, but it's adding to the ambience.
Yeah.
Crime,
yeah,
so.
very appropriate, isn't it? Yeah. So that's the pilot, and yeah, I think that is a kind of a bit of a longer special episode as our kind of an introductory one. And then episode 2 goes into our kind of main suite of episodes. So episode 2 is set in Camberley, and it centers around a poisoning. And I think somebody mentioned some arsenic. Was it Kim mentioned arsenic poisoning in her family? So, you know, the Victorian period was known as the arsenic century. There was, you know, it was such a common way because obviously forensic science was not kind of at the stage that it is now. So it was like a very common way to kind of rid yourself of people that you wanted to get rid of. So, you know, that's kind of what we're looking at here, is this kind of idea that it's really hard in that period to prove definitively that it was kind of cold-blooded murder versus an accident. So that's kind of what we look at there in episode 2. And then episode 3 is set in rural Suffolk in a place called Peasenhall. And it's a very actually tragic one, I'd say. This one really got me, this one, because it's about a young woman who's about 23, in her early 20s, who's found kind of murdered after a big storm during the night. And it turns out that she's actually 6 months pregnant, and she's been kind of concealing that pregnancy. She works as a domestic servant in this home, and it's all centers around this kind of, who's the father of this child that, might have had absolute kind of direct motive to conceal and kind of shut Rose up, basically, and never have that kind of pregnancy reach full term, and for them to be, scandalized and embarrassed. So again, another fascinating one. And then we've got 2 further ones coming next week.
Yeah, 2 more to come. They get released every Wednesday on all your podcast platforms. So whether it's like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, etc. And then the video versions, if you want to watch the video version, it's like a TV episode in itself. They go up on the following Monday on YouTube, if anybody wants to wait for those instead. So episode 3 will be up on Monday on YouTube. Can you give us a little tease as to what might be happening in episodes 4 and 5?
Yes, definitely. So episode 4, we go to Essex, to Southend. Again, all of these are kind of, you've said before that, Victorians loved true crime and murder, and a lot of these crimes are from that period. So again, Southend, kind of Victorian period, actually maybe Edwardian, and again, as I say, it touches on this idea of domestic violence. And this one, I have to do a huge shout out to Tom Fitton, who's a member of the community, for sending this one into us, because this is, the victim in this case was his ancestor, Carrie, and he'd already kind of looked into the story, and he kind of sent it to us as a bit of an option. So absolute shout out to him, and huge kudos for kind of the discovery here. And it's a fascinating case of, was this kind of premeditated murder, or was this, a very violent relationship that kind of, spilled over into basically a terrible death. And then the last episode that we have is up in Scotland, so very close to David's heart as a Scot, and it's at a place called Ardlamont, and it's a bit more kind of, a lot of the episodes we've had so far are concentrated on kind of more working class families, and kind of perpetrators and victims, and all of the people are, have a voice because of these crimes. They're kind of working class. They're maybe not seen in the traditional records as much, whereas episode 5 is much more kind of upper class. It's quite scandalous. It's a kind of a shooting weekend up in Scotland, and which ends in kind of the tragic death of a young man. And was it, was there a kind of nefarious motivation behind this death, or was it simply a, dropped his gun and it went off kind of scenario? So
yeah, lots of people desperate for no spoilers, Maddie. Luckily you've not given away.
I don't think I've been very careful. The detail, it's the devil's in the detail. There are no spoilers here. I'm not going to tell you, was it an accident, was it not, all of those things. So you're going to have to listen to
episode 4 next Wednesday, episode 5 the following Wednesday on your podcast platforms, and then the following Monday for YouTube. Wonderful. And I suppose that actually leads us nicely into where can we listen, where can we watch. So we've already mentioned YouTube for the video episodes. We've already mentioned Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Where else can people listen?
You can literally listen wherever you get your podcasts. So we've made it so that it will just go anywhere that you could possibly find a podcast. We will be on it. So just search Was Justice Served, and you will discover that. And we're also, one of the key elements is that we want listeners to be really, really involved in this podcast. Hence why we've kind of titled it a question, because we pose that question to you as the listener. We want you to kind of listen along to the case and form your own judgments about whether justice was served. And one of the great things now that we've got our new collections tool is that that we've created what we're calling case files for each episode, which is a dedicated collection of the newspapers. So you can kind of go and review those collections for each episode. You can kind of delve into the evidence for yourself. You can read all about it. You can, if you find any others, we'd love some more evidence to add to them. So please tell us. But we want you to kind of form your own conclusions and let us know on social media. And we've also got you can also access it through the website, which is www.findmypast.co.uk/was justice served, all one word. So you can go to findmypast.co.uk/was justice served, and you will find a link to all of the collections, a link to all of the episodes. You can listen there if you want, if you don't want to go on Spotify as well.
Yeah, and Liam has just popped a link into the chat there. So yeah, you can read all about the podcast there, the people involved, a little breakdown of each of the episodes. You can find a link to each episode's case file in the form of a collection, so you can analyse the evidence for yourself and you can decide was justice served, really. And I think there's a vote as well. I think you can vote.
Yes, please do vote. Yeah, absolutely.
We spoke about episode 4 being a community submitted one. Maddie, what if somebody watching and listening to us now has a crime from their own family tree that they would like to see in a future episode? How might they go about that?
I would love any, if you've got a really interesting crime that you think was a bit of a miscarriage of justice or is really twisty and turny and has got lots of kind of a really meaty story, we would love to feature them with your permission in the podcast. So please do send them in. We've got an email address, which is discoveries@findmypast. Oh, sorry, is that the right one, Ellie?
Yeah. I'm just trying to find it on screen, which I cannot find. Hold on, I'm going to bring up it on screen now. Yeah, we'll go with discoveries.
Yeah. Sorry, just thinking that maybe that's not the right one anymore.
There you go.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah, it is. Discoveries@findmypast.com. There we go. Sorry, had a momentary thing of like, is that right? Yeah, discoveries@findmypast.com. So please, give us a bit of an outline of the story. It doesn't have to be really wordy, just very brief, with, how are they related to you? And if you do have any clippings or anything that you could kind of attach with that, please do. And we'd really love to feature your stories as well.
And before we finish up, actually, because we've briefly touched on all of the episodes that we've got so far, and without any spoilers, which has been your favourite episode so far and why?
Oh, that's a tricky question. I think probably I do really love the pilot episode with David Olusoga, because I think it's so fascinating always, I think, with family history to really see the kind of end impact of, understanding your story and kind of, doing that research. So it was really amazing to have that kind of element of the kind of inserted into the podcast of, here's this story that we've, told, and here's this really rich narrative, and here's all of the details of it from the newspapers, and what can we kind of infer about the characters from their statements and their relationships, and how can we kind of pull all of that rich detail out and discuss it. And then once we've done that, kind of embedded in that, to have somebody that's saying, well, that makes me feel like this, and seeing my ancestor that my mum remembers in the newspaper feels like this. And so that is a really amazing element of that first episode, I'd say.
Yeah. And what's next? Because we've got 5 episodes.
Yes.
I've already seen people leaving comments on YouTube and on our other platforms going, why are you only doing 5 episodes? Like, what else? Are we doing anything else?
They take a long time. So well, I'm so glad that people are enjoying them and want more, obviously, and we'd love to produce some more. So I think what we're working on at the moment is to create some kind of, we've got lots of extra material. So we're going to create some little kind of bonus episodes, probably two or three of those. We're aiming that this would be kind of a 6-monthly podcast. So the next one would fall kind of just probably early 2025, so January time. But we'd obviously have kind of three bonuses between now and then. But yeah, we are definitely aiming to make this a recurrent series, definitely.
I hope so. And to all of you listening and watching today, if you want more than 5 episodes, you know what you've got to do. You've got to go and listen to all 5 episodes, because that's a great signal for Maddie and for the team that the interest is really there. So if you'd like more, please do listen. Tell your friends. It's been such a passion project for you, Maddie, and you've done such an amazing job spearheading this. I keep telling everybody, like, you've nailed it, girl. High five.
Well, a huge amount of kudos as well, I do have to say, to the rest of the team, because, you know, as with everything like this, you just can't, it's always a team effort. So massive shout out to Jen, obviously, as such a research pro and co-host. I know that she is absolutely delighted to be kind of like add podcast host to her huge list of accolades, and the rest of the team, you know, Daisy, who I think might come on here sometimes, as well as kind of, you know, assistant producer and doing a huge amount of that scripting, and all of the rest of the team, like AV and audiovisual team that kind of do all the nitty gritty editing and make the lighting look right, and, you know, all of that. It's a real team effort. So yeah, as Ellie says, please do listen or watch. Please do share it. You know, please give us your reviews, hopefully 5-star. So yeah, so we know it was all worth it.
And Karen as well. Karen's been helping out with some of the research. We have to give a shout out to Karen too.
Yeah.
So yeah, massive team effort. Yeah. Okay, lovely. I think we're just coming up to the hour, so I think we'll probably leave it there, unless there's any other closing comments you'd like to make, Maddie.
No, just reiterate, you know, thank you for having me on, and, you know, just listen and share and give us your verdicts. Was justice served?
Lovely, fantastic. Guys, thank you so much for watching and for tuning in today. It's, as always, it's great to see you here, and it's always a privilege to be able to come and talk with like-minded people like yourselves about things we're all really passionate about, like history and family history, and it's like family history nerds unite, and I love it. And I love doing this. Thank you to our guests. We will get David back, because he's very keen to talk to you all. As you could see, he's so engaging and such a good speaker. So we will get him back with Jen, because you can see the magic of having both of them together chatting. So we will arrange that for some point over the summer, I think. So yeah, there's going to be 2 more episodes coming, Wednesday and then the following Wednesday. You can watch them on YouTube. What else do I need to say? Oh, yes. So do you remember last year we released, as Findmypast, a short film called Finding Janet, where we took Janet on a sort of a family history journey to find out more about her 2 times great-grandmother, who was also called Janet, who was a canal boat captain. Well, I have some really good news for you, because it's time for the 2nd installment. I'm so excited. We have a brand new guest. We help a great-granddaughter find the true story of her really brave ancestor who took part in some way in both the First and the Second World Wars. So that is coming next week. I've got goosebumps just telling you about it, because it's beautiful. So keep your eyes peeled for that. Have a lovely weekend, and we will catch you same time next week. Thank you, guys. Bye.